I mean, it seems like he's making a contradictory testimony. He's saying on the one hand, I love using Twitter. I bought Twitter because the sheer influence of being able to tweet on topics and change American life and change the world and all that. And on the other hand, he's saying, oh, well, I didn't expect anybody to actually believe me and invest their life savings based on funding secured. I mean, it seems to me that's stating it. If he had shouted that at a shareholder meeting,
right,
and the stock exchange had frozen the sale of the company's stock to trade in, he'd be culpable for having said those things in a public setting. How is Twitter not a public setting?
I think that's what's going to come of this, and it's extra irony on top of irony that this is Elon Musk, who now owns Twitter, who says, I had to own Twitter because speech is not free enough on Twitter. So I had to go in there and take care of that.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, January 20th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone. I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman, technology reporter for NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove. And our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay, Scott, you've had quite a couple days. I mean, the first thing was you were with the President of the United States yesterday, right? He came out to look at the damage on the coast here.
Yeah, so he came out to look at the damage, and I was not with him then. I was actually assigned to the Air Force One duty. You know, there's always got to be one crew when Air Force One arrives, and I had never done that. It was actually kind of cool to see sort of the pageantry of Air Force One and the Osprey helicopters that guard it and all that stuff. That was kind of cool.
Did you get any mementos? Did you get a cocktail napkin that says Air Force One on it or anything?
Shockingly, no. That'll be, and I doubt I'm going to progress to the point where I travel with the president. But no, it was just fun and got some cool photos to share with the kids.
Oh, very nice. Okay, today we're back to the classic Friday bad news, saying that it faces a different economic reality. Those are nice buzzwords. What do you think it means?
I think it means, and this means for Google, what it means for, and for Sundar Pichai, what it means to a lot of other companies and CEOs, they thought the good times were going to last. And I don't mean to equate pandemic, which is a horrible thing, with good times, but for tech companies, they had never really seen sales like this. We were locked down. We were buying their products. We were buying software for their products. We were buying services for their products. Tech companies had really never seen sales like this. And for Google and many other companies, the stock prices reached all-time highs. And for whatever reason, I don't think they had a contingency plan for people are going to go back to work and back to the movies and back to the gym and all that stuff and back to real life, living their lives. And so they thought what some people called the digital future would last deeply into the future. And as we found out, both on Wall Street and for the economic realities, we're back to kind of where we were in, say, 2019, 2020, when we just didn't need these tech companies quite as much anymore. And they grew so fast that now they're dealing with lower sales, lower stock price, and they have to reduce their headcount.
Yeah, I think they read their press clippings a little too carefully. They bought into it. They should never, ever do that. Now, we know that most companies, we talked about this before, they have a 10% layoff model built into their long-term strategy, that if things get tight, we cut back. Now, most of the layoffs we've seen a lot of them this week. This is sort of astounding. A couple of weeks ago, we were feeling like, well, maybe it's topped out. Maybe the Salesforce layoff is the last big one. And, we're up at over 30,000, pushing 40,000 layoffs in the Bay Area. That's pretty high. Maybe we're going to, be spared much more. And then all of a sudden this week, not just in Silicon Valley, but across tech, we had Amazon, and Amazon laid off 18,000 people. Microsoft laid off 10,000 people, including much of its Xbox and Bethesda divisions. And the hits just keep on coming. Is this an example of everybody elbowing their way to the back, and finally somebody had to step up and take the hit, and then everybody's just piling on so they can get their story out of the news cycle as quickly as possible?
I mean, to an extent, I think, some companies, and we've seen this, have done it a little more thoughtfully than others, in terms of building out either a way to tell people thoughtfully and let them know, or to build out a good severance package. But yeah, I think ultimately everyone was standing in line to be the next tech domino to fall. Some of the Bitcoin companies were struggling because they're just going to go out of business and they're going bankrupt. But for the big tech companies, I think it was just one after the other. And that's sort of how it's been. And no matter how successful you've been up to this point, whether you're Microsoft or Amazon or Salesforce or Google or Meta, you tripped up along the way because you thought the good times would last. And that brings us to the one company that's the biggest company. And that has not had a layoff, and that's Apple. And, are they going to cut back? Their stock price hasn't fallen quite as much as some of the others. They didn't grow quite as quickly during the pandemic as some of the others. But I wonder if they're finding themselves with the need to lower headcount too. But they're really the big one right now that stands out for not having a major, 5% or 6% layoff.
Well, let's talk about Google. I mean, there's a company made up of young people who have been told that they are the best on earth, they're geniuses. And now they find themselves on the street. And that's got to be psychologically devastating. I mean, the older people working at Google, I'm sure they're not really surprised. I mean, this has happened before in their careers, but the young people, and Google is mostly young people because they drive out, anybody that gets over about 40 years old with age discrimination, which they've been sued for, I believe. What's going to happen to these kids? Are you heading out on a story next week as they come out with their cardboard boxes? Are they going to leave the Valley? Are they going to leave tech? I mean, this has been got to be a huge ego blow.
Yeah,
to these kids. They're there forever.
Right. It is an ego blow. It's a tough time to try to find a job right now in tech, whether you're in Silicon Valley or in New York or Boston. This is a 12,000 person layoff globally. So we don't know how many people in Silicon Valley or the Bay Area. One of the interesting things to come out of the Microsoft layoff was 10,000 people, but they said only 40 or 50 or so in the Bay Area, at least at first. But sometimes the numbers do go up. Intel raised the number and things like that. But yeah, it's tough because when you're in tech, and you have been in tech in the last, I'd say few years, but I could even say 2 decades, you've been told you're our generation's version of what my parents called the best and the brightest, right? And the best and the brightest don't get laid off with, a few months severance and told, go find something in a tough economy. But right now, even though tech still rules the Valley, these companies are nervous. Their stock prices are down. They have some hiring freezes. The VC money isn't flowing like it did before. And so we may be in an overall pretty good economy with a pretty low, let's face it, unemployment rate, but companies just aren't hiring that much because they're nervous. And that's why we're going to have some tough times, at least for a little while. Then maybe interest rate falls, stock market goes back up, people get a little less, tight with the money on Sand Hill Road, and then perhaps the companies will start to hire again. But they went through a big up and then a pretty decent fall, and I think they're nervous because of that.
Yeah, I have to say that I worked for a while at the Google headquarters in London with a bunch of other veteran journalists. We were actually working on a book that wasn't related to Google, but I've never seen such a group of privileged young people in my entire life. And one of the other actually was Bob Grove, our East Coast correspondent. He was there with me, and he looked at me one day and looked at the kids playing Wii, getting free food and all that, and he said, "These kids one day are going to get a big surprise, and they don't know it's coming." Well, it's arrived, I guess. We'll see. I mean, it's going to be challenging, and I hope they don't become too dispirited, because this is the business cycle, and it's always been there. It's just been kind of in hiding for a decade, but it's come back. Right. So we'll see.
Right. And the big question is, are we heading into another cycle of 2008, 2009, or the dot-com bust of 2000? So far, I would say emphatically no. We haven't lost 35, 40% of these companies. But I think the rise was so fast over the last couple of years. And honestly, some of these companies apparently just thought that was how we were going to be forever. But what it turned out was that was how we were going to be while locked down largely in our homes. And I celebrate the fact that, we can get out more and that we can go to a restaurant or a movie theater or the gym.
We have a real life. That'd be
exactly.
Cool. Yeah.
And that I think is something to celebrate, but it's also an adjustment for these companies that we're so used to just selling out all their product right away.
Well, perhaps with all their free time, all these laid off employees around here can stop by a church and light a candle for the appearance of the next big thing, because I don't think things are going to get too much better until we have some new technology that just lights us all up and brings energy back into the valley again. So we'll see. Okay, next, on this list of stories, Elon Musk. Every time it's like the Godfather. Every time you think you got out, they drag you back in. We're back on Elon again. So he was in court today. So did you run over to Mountain View to cover Google and then race up to San Francisco to cover the Musk trial?
Yeah, this was a lot of driving today. I was in San Francisco and outside federal court. We didn't get a glimpse of him going in because apparently, unlike in the San Jose federal court where you have to actually walk to the front door, in San Francisco, you can drive underground and get in that way. So we didn't see Musk walk in, but, heard him testify. And, at issue here is whether or not his tweet about taking Tesla private and those two crucial words, funding secured, are enough to warrant a successful lawsuit. And some of the investors who bought in, assuming they would see $420, and then did not, because that particular deal, as we now know, fell through, and the stock price at the time fell, are suing. And so at issue is, can a tweet move the stock price? And it was interesting because at one point, Musk admitted when asked, why do you use Twitter, Mr. Musk? He said, it's a great way to communicate both with customers and investors. But at the same time saying, but this is not real communication with investors, is what he's trying to say. And, I'm not an expert in what the law is on either insider trading or what a CEO can say about a stock or about his company's stock price. But whatever it is that you can or cannot say, it seems to be applied to what you can or cannot tweet, because I think Twitter is pretty much the de facto way of communicating now.
It is speech.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can get around. It seems like he's making a contradictory testimony. He's saying on the one hand, I love using Twitter. I bought Twitter because the sheer influence of being able to tweet on topics and change American life and change the world and all that. And on the other hand, he's saying, oh, well, I didn't expect anybody to actually believe me and invest their life savings based on funding secured. It seems to me that's stating it. If he had shouted that at a shareholder meeting,
right,
and the stock exchange had frozen the sale of the company's stock to trade in, he'd be culpable for having said those things in a public setting. How is Twitter not a public setting?
I think that's what's going to come of this. And it's extra irony on top of irony that this is Elon Musk, who now owns Twitter, who says, I had to own Twitter because speech is not free enough on Twitter. So I had to go in there and take care of that. And now he's saying, well, it doesn't really mean that. So I'm not sure where this goes. I believe he'll be back on the stand more next week. But this is, I think it could be a real important case of setting precedent for online communication or social media communications, but particularly for Twitter, that so many people take for news and fact and information and the way to get that information out. And Musk has been one of those advocates for that. So there is a little bit of irony here that he is on the stand for essentially saying we've got a deal, having that deal fall through, and saying, well, we didn't really have a deal. I just tweeted it out.
How big is this class action suit? What are the numbers on it?
It's interesting. We hear billions of dollars thrown around, but I don't know. I haven't seen an exact single dollar figure. And I don't know if that's because of its class action nature. There are a couple of names of investors that keep getting brought up, and one does have a lawyer who's been asking the questions. I don't know how many people are involved or exactly how much money that side can come up with as damages if indeed Musk is found, guilty and responsible for that money.
One of the favorite things I like about talking to you is you give us verisimilitude of the event itself. What was it like in the courtroom? Was there a lot of press there?
Yeah, well, not as much as, say, the Holmes trial, but there was, and by the way, this didn't get anywhere near the action on Twitter. Another irony that the Holmes trial did.
I'm struck that this is one of those cases that 20 years from now we may look back and we say this was a milestone case.
I agree.
It's sort of like those Supreme Court things were like Brown v. Board of Education, where the implications really emerged later on. And right now, I haven't seen a lot of press coverage because it's getting buried in all the layoffs and everything else going on in the country.
Right. And it may be one of those that doesn't get noticed all that much unless and until we have a verdict that really does say, what you tweet is as responsible, as culpable, I'm not sure what the right word is, as what you say, say in a press release to CNBC. If CNBC had said, like you said just a few minutes ago, the deal is done. Tesla's going to be taken private at $420 a share. Hey, investors, there's a pretty decent premium between what the stock trades now and 420. And, we're going to either freeze the stock or it's going to go crazy tomorrow. And that's what would happen. And if that deal fell through, there would be significant culpability. And the question is, does that culpability apply when it's tweeted instead of, press released in that way by a company?
Look, if you went on the news in a few minutes here and came up with a bogus story that caused serious financial damage, and you didn't have any kind of proof of what you were saying, you could be sued for libel. If I did the same thing in a newspaper story or a book where I didn't have the evidence and I was making up stuff and it caused financial damage, I would be culpable. So why wouldn't a business tycoon who literally changes markets with his comments not be held liable for those two words?
Well, it's a good question. And I think because the answer so far has been because he tweeted it. And I don't know, that may change, and it may change with this case. And I think that's why there should be a lot of people paying attention to this, because it has less spectacle. There were maybe 2 cameras outside I saw today. It's not getting the huge crush of attention. But like you say, this may be something that actually years or decades down the line sets precedent. And perhaps what you just said, if I tweeted that, would I also be held liable? And that's a significant thing. In our business, we're told, don't tweet anything. And the word used to be don't email anything unless you can imagine it on the front page of the New York Times. And that says a lot, I think, as to how respectable Twitter has become for news.
Well, you and I heard a lot of folks in Silicon Valley saying Elon better, keep his mouth shut. He's popping off a little too much and it's going to catch up with him. Maybe this is it.
He was asked if some of his advisors ever advised him to stop tweeting and to tweet less. And after some back and forth, he admitted, every once in a while I get that advice. Clearly, he's not taking it, but
no,
at least he's honest about it.
Okay, well, speaking of crowds at trials, by the way, how's Tesla stock doing? What was the reaction today?
Today, it didn't move all that much. It's actually been doing well. Remember, it fell really, really, really low, and it's had a pretty good couple of weeks. Not near where it was, during the pre-Twitter ownership of Elon Musk that seems to have, done so badly by it. But I think people are responding to perhaps the China market opening, it'll be interesting to see the sales figures come in, because last week, actually earlier this week, Tesla discounted across the board a lot of those cars. I've had people tell me, well, I was waiting on the sideline, I'm jumping in now because of the price. And I wonder if that would juice sales to the point where investors move on that. I don't know, but clearly he's trying to move some vehicles with cheaper prices.
Yeah, I noticed, going back to the layoffs, those companies did pretty well with their layoff announcements. They all seem to get a pretty good bump in the markets.
They often do. And that's because they're laying people off and not saying we're laying people off because we have significant concerns going forward with finance or whatever. They're saying they lay people off because we just grew too fast.
Yeah, so we're cutting overhead.
Yeah, essentially.
That just adds to the bottom line in the eyes of, stock analysts. Okay, I noticed one guy at the Musk trial, lead plaintiff Glenn Littleton, he testified he lost 75% of his investments following Musk's tweet. Who puts that kind of money into one basket?
Right, based on a tweet. I mean, these are all bad things. And
was there a lot of pathos when the audience was listening? The people in the courtroom were listening to him talk about how much money, or were people like shaking their head, going, "What an idiot! Why would you do that?"
I don't know. I wonder. I don't know that. How do you prove you lost 75% of your? I don't know how you do that. Courtrooms, as we know, are full of hyperbole and those kind of stories. So I don't know how much.
You've grown cynical about courtrooms and trials in the last year. And let's get to the reason why. Speaking of show trials, Elizabeth Holmes. Okay, was she back in court, or is just the prosecution filing statements?
This is the prosecution. If you're talking about what I know you're talking about, they were filing something today, but it wasn't something in court. This goes back almost exactly a year to the day.
Yeah.
And apparently she bought these tickets.
Yes. Well, there seems to be there's three things the prosecution claimed. Let's go to the two minor ones. One of them is, quote, she still shows no remorse to her victims, unquote. That seems to be designed to sway the judge's opinion on these other matters.
Right. It's unknowable. I don't buy that. It's unknowable.
Okay. And she's still living on an estate costing $13,000 a month during her appeal.
Again, no material. I mean, I don't mean to sound like a lawyer here, but look, if she's married or, hooked up with a guy and they live large, again, that has nothing to do with what happened at Theranos or what, her prison sentence should be in the future. So she lives on a nice place, whatever. The rest of us just chose the wrong careers.
And three, the big one.
Right.
Prosecution claimed that she had bought a one-way ticket to Mexico. At the beginning of the trial, or just before the verdict came down?
No, in fact, after. So the verdict came down January 3rd of 2022. They say she bought these tickets about 3 weeks later, one way to Mexico. Now, her attorneys are saying, well, they were going to go to a wedding, and that was the plan, and the tickets were bought ahead of all this. They thought maybe she'd be free and could go to the wedding. But the prosecution decided to bring this up and say she's a flight risk. She bought one-way tickets, a one-way ticket to Mexico. And that's not a good look when you've been found guilty.
Well, the one-way part is kind of suspicious. She said, she needed, and she claimed that she wanted to be allowed to travel because her husband, or whatever he is, travels a lot on business, and she wanted to go along. Okay, but you buy round trip tickets.
It is a weird look for someone whose passport has been taken away, and who is on their way to prison, to buy a one-way ticket to anything, anywhere. Why do you do that? I have no idea, but that's where the bad look is. Absolutely.
Okay, well, that'll be very interesting to see what impact that has on. I don't think it's going to be a good plea for mercy to the to the judge.
No, there have been many pleas and they haven't worked. She's still been sentenced to 11 years, 3 months, and I I don't. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but my lawyer.
He's still going up the river. Well, up the bay.
That's what they tell me. Yes.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, finally, we got this from our producer Jordan. He spotted something really interesting. It just got completely buried, as far as I could tell, in the media. The Pacific Island nation of Tuvalu, which I guess is the smallest nation in the world, a sovereign nation, as opposed to, like the St. John's Hospitaliers or a building or something. It's certainly one of the smallest nations in the world, has begun to create a digital nation in the metaverse as the country faces the reality of rising sea levels. Interesting. Maybe that's Zuckerberg's big plan, is ultimately to sign in, have all the nations of the world build a shadow self in the metaverse. But it's kind of interesting because, remember, these guys have been saying, Tuvalu has been saying, we're going to be underwater in a few years because of rising seas, because of global warming. I don't know if I've seen any evidence of that since then, but this seems to be a pretty big step. It was their Minister of Justice, Communication, and Foreign Affairs said it at the UN Climate Conference, that they're going to catalog, map, record, and save historical documents, records of cultural practice, family albums, and traditional songs in order to create an alternative that captures as much of Tuvaluvian life as possible. It's an interesting concept, the idea of saving a civilization online.
I agree. And it's interesting and kind of sad. I mean, if this were being done to preserve culture and to make sure that when the elders of this, nation die out, that no matter where you are in the world, you can have a virtual visit and learn about the songs and the culture, that would be very nice. The fact that they're doing it because they're worried about being underwater is sad, absolutely, obviously. Yeah. But I mean, there's something very Second Life-ish to it. As you say, maybe this is Zuckerberg's plan, whereas Musk says when the planet goes away, we will, speaking of one-way tickets, go to Mars. Zuckerberg will say, we'll just go to the metaverse and call it a day. I don't know. I'd like this as a template for nations and cultures. But yeah, it has a tinge of sadness, certainly, because of the rising seas.
It's an intriguing idea that I wonder if it's an augury for the future, because civilizations disappear all the time. And even civilizations that continue on, they metamorphose over time. What would have been like if we had something like the metaverse during the Civil War? So we could actually become time travelers going back in time and fully immerse in a world that's long gone. I mean, if even in the 1950s, if the citizens of Bikini Atoll or Eniwetok had been able to save their culture before they were moved off and those islands were destroyed by the atomic bomb, what a powerful thing that would be. I mean, even if the Tuvaluians are incorrect about the fate of their island, the notion of saving a culture is a really intriguing one. And
absolutely. I mean, when you talk about why I'm not excited about the metaverse, it's because I have no desire to see a virtual concert of 1975 or Travis Scott, or I want to see these people in person. I don't want to go to a club that's virtual. I don't want to see a house that's virtual. But if it can be something historical that no longer exists, that we can somehow almost feel a part of, that might be worth the technology, because it would be passing on, again, language, culture, traditions of a place that maybe doesn't even exist or is running out. I mean, you look at, say, Steven Spielberg's Shoah project to interview survivors of the Holocaust before there are no more. And, to get that on tape, on film, and to create a metaverse for a culture like this, let's say, could be very important and very enlightening to the younger generation. I think that would be a fascinating use of it.
Okay, well, Mark Zuckerberg, if you're listening, we have your new business model for you. So that's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.